Everyone thought the wedding planner was perfect. That's the word people kept using, perfect. Perfect smile. Perfect clipboard. Perfect calm voice. Even when the florist was late and the cake arrived missing an entire tier. Her name was Lydia. And from the very first meeting, she treated me like I was fragile glass. "Don't worry, ma'am," she would say, placing a hand gently on my arm. "I'll take care of everything. You've already done so much for your son." She said it kindly, sweetly, almost lovingly. And I believed her. Because why wouldn't I? This was my son's wedding. The boy I carried for 9 months. The boy whose first word was mama. The boy who used to fall asleep with his hand wrapped around my finger. I wasn't just attending this wedding. I had poured my life into it. The venue? I paid for it. The orchestra? My idea. The guest list? I helped trim it so there'd be no family drama. I didn't want control. I just wanted everything to be right. And Lydia made me feel like I was being helpful, without being in the way. That should have been my first warning. 3 weeks before the wedding, I noticed something small. So small I almost ignored it. I walked into the ballroom during a planning meeting, and Lydia was standing unusually close to my future daughter-in-law, Emily. Their voices dropped the moment I entered. Emily smiled too fast. Lydia turned around like she'd been caught stealing cookies. "Oh, we were just finalizing the surprise schedule," Lydia said brightly. Surprise? That word stuck with me, because no one had mentioned a surprise. But I smiled anyway. I always smiled. I had learned over the years that smiling kept things peaceful. At home that night, my husband asked me why I seemed distracted. "I'm fine," I said. "Just wedding nerves." He laughed. "You're not the one getting married." I almost said no, but I'm the one being replaced. But I didn't. Because good mothers don't say things like that out loud. Over the next few days, the feeling didn't go away. It grew. Little moments kept piling up. Lydia stopped looping me into emails I was previously included in. Emily began answering questions for me before I finished asking. My seating suggestions were suddenly already handled. Handled as if I were a task. Still, I told myself I was imagining it. This was a happy time. I refused to be that mother. The night everything changed, it was raining. I remember because the sound of it against the windows made the house feel hollow. My son had left his tablet on the kitchen counter earlier that day. He was always forgetting things like that. As a child, he'd forget his shoes if they weren't on his feet. I went to return it to his room. And that's when the screen lit up. A notification banner. A name. Lydia W. And beneath it, just one line of preview text. "She doesn't suspect a thing." I froze. Not because I thought it was about me, but because I felt it. The way your body knows something before your mind catches up. I told myself not to look. I stood there for a full 30 seconds, my hand hovering over the screen like it might burn me. Then the tablet buzzed again. Another message. "We just have to get through the ceremony." My heart started beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. I picked up the tablet, unlocked it, and stepped into a truth I was never meant to see. The messages weren't long. That was the cruelest part. They didn't need to be, because they were confident. They spoke about me like I was already gone, like furniture being moved out of a room. "She still thinks she's in charge. After the wedding, we'll handle it. He'll understand once everything's done." I scrolled slowly, painfully. Every message felt like a quiet slap. There were plans, conversations, assumptions about my silence. They talked about limiting my access, about boundaries I'd never agreed to, about how emotional I could get, and how it was better if things were presented to me, not discussed. And then I saw the line that made my knees buckle. "Worst case, we embarrass her a little. She'll back off." Embarrass me. At my son's wedding. I sat down on the edge of the bed, the tablet heavy in my hands. My first instinct was to call my son. My second was to scream. But then something else happened. Something quieter. Something colder. I realized they weren't worried about me finding out. They were worried about timing, which meant they were sure of the outcome. They thought they had already won. I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling and replayed every interaction with Lydia. Every gentle smile. Every reassuring nod. Every moment she made me feel useful, while slowly removing me from the picture. I understood now. She wasn't managing the wedding. She was managing me. The next morning, Lydia called. Her voice was warm, professional, untouched by guilt. "Good morning. Just checking in. How are you feeling today?" I took a breath. "I'm feeling calm," I said. And I meant it. Because I had made a decision. I wasn't going to confront anyone. Not yet. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to warn. I was going to watch. And I was going to remember everything. Because if there's one thing people underestimate, it's a mother who stops reacting. The morning after I discovered the messages, I didn't speak to anyone. I moved through the house like a ghost, careful to keep my composure. My husband offered breakfast with his usual warmth. My son chirped about the rehearsal dinner. And Emily flitted about like a delicate bird, but unaware, or pretending to be unaware, of the storm brewing quietly in the room. I nodded politely. I smiled. I did everything a mother was expected to do. And all the while, the tablet rested silently on the kitchen counter, glowing faintly with Lydia's messages. I sat at the window for nearly an hour, watching the garden. The roses were in full bloom, but their scent felt almost mocking. How could something so beautiful exist while deception was festering just a few rooms away? I thought about what these messages meant. They weren't vague threats. They were calculated, precise, and patient. Every line, every plan had been meticulously crafted. I realized then that this wasn't just about managing a wedding. It was about erasing me from my son's life in small, controlled steps. The first message I read again, the one that made my knees buckle, echoed in my mind. Worst case, we embarrass her a little. She'll back off. I clenched my fists. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. How dare they? How dare someone treat me like I was a guest in my own house? By late morning, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to confront anyone immediately. That would alert them. They were confident, remember? Confident people make mistakes, but only if you watch closely. Instead, I started documenting everything. Every small detail I could recall from the past few weeks. Every unusual smile, every exclusion, every subtle word from Lydia that now seemed loaded with double meaning. I kept a notebook beside me, writing in careful, deliberate handwriting. Each note was a breadcrumb, a piece of evidence to remember, a piece of the puzzle. I also began rereading the messages. This time, I read them not as a mother betrayed, but as a strategist. I needed to understand their endgame. She still thinks she's in charge. After the wedding, we'll handle it. He'll understand once everything's done. Each line revealed their arrogance, their certainty, their belief that I was powerless. And that's when I realized something crucial. I wasn't powerless. I just hadn't acted yet. Throughout the day, the tension built quietly. I avoided Lydia, keeping all interactions polite and short. I smiled when necessary, but each smile was cold steel beneath velvet. The family, blissfully unaware, went about their preparations. Invitations were double-checked. Flowers arranged. Guests confirmed. Emily glowed like a princess, oblivious to the growing storm. And I watched. Every gesture. Every word. Every small interaction. Every time Lydia thought she was clever. Late in the afternoon, another message arrived. This time, it wasn't on the tablet left at home. It was on my personal phone. A new number. No name, just text. Keep her distracted. Ceremony begins at 3. She mustn't know until vows. I read it slowly, deliberately. I let it sink in. My blood ran cold, but my mind went sharp. I could see the logic behind their moves now. They wanted me out of the way without a scene. They wanted control. They wanted compliance. And most importantly, they wanted me to believe I had no choice. I spent hours replaying every conversation I'd had with Lydia, every suggestion she made, every reassurance, every helpful smile. At first, I doubted myself. Could I be overreacting? Was I imagining patterns where none existed? But the messages were proof. Concrete proof. No ambiguity, no room for error. And that proof gave me clarity. By evening, I had formulated my plan. Not a plan of confrontation. Not yet, but a plan of observation. I would watch. I would listen. I would take note. Every move they made would be remembered. Every word, every action, every lie. Because patience was my weapon now. Silence was my shield. And knowledge, Amri, the knowledge I had gained, was my power. I prepared myself mentally for the next day, the wedding morning. The day everyone would be happy, joyous, oblivious. And the day I would stand silent, watching, waiting. Every smile they shared, every laugh they gave, every step they took. I would see the truth. I would see everything. And they wouldn't suspect a thing. As night fell, I placed the tablet in my purse. I looked at my reflection in the bedroom mirror. My face was calm, composed. The eyes, however, told a different story. Cold, alert, unyielding. I whispered to myself, "You think you can manipulate me? But I've already seen And I will remember, sleep came fitfully that night. I dreamed not of wedding flowers or laughter, but of shadows moving behind smiles. Every interaction replayed in slow motion. Every subtle gesture catalogued. By dawn, I was ready. The wedding morning would not be ordinary. I knew that now. I didn't yet know what would happen. I didn't yet know how the events would unfold. But one thing was certain. I was no longer a passive observer. I was awake. And I was prepared. The wedding morning arrived with a crisp, golden light spilling into every corner of the house. From the outside, everything looked serene. The sun rising softly, birds singing, the distant hum of early deliveries. But inside, I felt a storm brewing. A storm I could sense long before anyone else. I woke earlier than usual, even before my alarm. There was no excitement, no jitters, only a sharp awareness, a hyper-focused calm. I dressed in muted tones, careful not to draw attention. Every movement deliberate, every gesture measured. Today, I was watching, observing, recording everything in my mind. The first sign that Lydia was already in full control came within minutes. She arrived precisely at 6:45 a.m., her heels clicking softly on the marble floor. She carried her planner's binder like a shield, her smile flawless and practiced. She greeted me warmly as if nothing had happened, as if her messages and manipulations didn't exist. "Good morning, ma'am. Everything is going perfectly," she said. Her tone was casual, but I could detect the faint undercurrent of calculation. Subtle, almost imperceptible. I nodded. "I can see that," I replied, my voice calm, smooth, betraying nothing. I followed her instructions, allowing myself to be guided through the rooms. Each small gesture, each whispered instruction, only deepened my understanding of how much they underestimated me. They believed silence equaled ignorance. They were wrong. By 7:30 a.m., the kitchen was alive with activity. Florists arranged bouquets, caterers checked trays, and my son moved through the chaos, unaware of the tension swirling beneath the surface. Emily flitted about, smiling and adjusting the bridesmaids' dresses. Every movement was perfect, every gesture choreographed, and Lydia orchestrated it all. I watched closely. Every exchange, every glance, every hurried whisper. My mind cataloged each detail. Who said what, who moved where, who looked nervous. At 8:15 a.m., I received a subtle signal from Lydia, a slight tilt of her head, a barely noticeable glance toward the dining hall. It was meant for someone else, someone who she assumed I wouldn't notice. But I noticed, and I stored it. These moments were like pieces of a puzzle, revealing the bigger picture of their plan. I didn't react. I simply observed. Every mistake, every slip, every hint of arrogance, I noted it all. Mid-morning passed, and tension grew. My son's groomsmen arrived. The photographer moved silently, capturing every expression. The air was thick with anticipation, but I remained detached, a silent observer in a room buzzing with emotion. Then, at 10:45 a.m., a small incident occurred. One of the caterers dropped a tray. Normally, a minor mishap, easily resolved. But Lydia's reaction was telling. She didn't apologize. She didn't scold. She paused, glanced at me as though to gauge my response, and then whispered to the caterer, "Keep moving. It's fine." That was it. A small, almost imperceptible test. She wanted to see if I would react, if I would show emotion, fear, or panic. And I didn't. I smiled faintly and continued observing, calm as ever. By noon, everything was set. Guests began arriving, and the mansion was alive with laughter, greetings, and the soft murmur of conversation. But my attention never left Lydia. Every gesture she made, every direction she gave, every subtle manipulation she attempted, I caught it all. Then the first message arrived on my phone. Another warning, another piece of the puzzle. Keep her occupied. Don't let her see the rehearsal. I smiled faintly, almost imperceptibly. They were confident. They believed they controlled the morning. They believed they had neutralized me. But confidence is fragile. The ceremony rehearsal began at 2 p.m. I followed the instructions, seated as directed, maintaining a calm, composed demeanor. Every step was deliberate. Every glance, every smile, carefully measured. I let Lydia believe she was succeeding. I let Emily believe everything was perfect. And then, at the critical moment, the moment when the officiant paused, and the guests looked on, a tiny slip occurred. Lydia reached for a list she shouldn't have needed, fumbling slightly. Her eyes darted toward me, and for just a fraction of a second I saw panic. I didn't react. I simply held her gaze. I let the silence speak. By mid-afternoon, I had pieced together everything I needed. Every interaction, every whispered instruction, every subtle glance, it painted a complete picture. And I realized they weren't just manipulating the wedding. They were trying to manipulate me. But I was no longer the mother they assumed I was. I was aware, observant, silent, waiting. At 3 p.m., the guests were in place. The ceremony was about to begin, and the tension was nearly unbearable. Every small movement mattered. Every whispered word carried weight. And I remained calm, collected, a silent storm in the center of the room. And then, just before the ceremony officially began, Lydia made one final misstep. She assumed I hadn't seen her messages. She assumed I would follow her guidance blindly. She assumed silence equaled ignorance. She was wrong. Because at that moment I made my decision. I would not react outwardly. I would not confront. I would wait. I would watch. And when the right moment came, after every guest had left and every secret was revealed, they would see the consequences of underestimating me. The ceremony ended flawlessly. From the outside, the wedding looked perfect. Guests clapped, cameras flashed, laughter echoed through the halls. Emily glowed in her gown. My son's smile was wide and genuine. Every detail, every floral arrangement, every aisle runner, every carefully chosen ribbon looked immaculate. But behind the smiles, I knew the truth. I had observed everything. I had cataloged every subtle manipulation, every lie, every small deliberate act meant to erase me from my son's special day. And now the time for silent observation had passed. I didn't rush. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I simply waited for the moment when it mattered most. After the last guest left, the mansion grew quiet. The soft hum of air conditioning replaced the chatter. The bridesmaids began gathering their things. Emily was still smiling, oblivious to the storm brewing quietly around her. I called Lydia aside. Her expression was unchanged at first. Still that practiced smile. Still that calm tone. "Ma'am, everything went perfectly," she said. "Yes," I replied softly. It did. Her eyes narrowed slightly. She could sense the shift, the change in the room. A subtle tension filled the air. I stepped closer. Calm, composed, deliberate. My voice was steady, almost gentle. "I saw the messages," I said. Her eyes widened. Her lips parted slightly. She tried to smile, but it faltered. "I saw everything," I continued. "Every plan. Every comment. Every assumption you made about me." The smile disappeared. The calmness faltered. She realized that the silent, observing mother she had underestimated was awake, alert, and aware. I handed her the tablet. Every message was there, preserved, documented. No ambiguity, no room for excuse. She glanced at the screen. Her hands trembled slightly. Shh, I interrupted. My voice low measured. "No words. Just remember, I've watched. I've observed. And I've remembered everything." She swallowed hard. The confidence she had worn like armor all morning melted into something else. Fear, uncertainty, realization. I stepped back. Calm again. Composed. My power was in restraint, in quiet control. The truth about the manipulation didn't need to be broadcasted in front of the guests. There was no need for public humiliation. The lesson, however, would be learned. Lydia left the mansion later that afternoon. Not fired yet, but she would never assume control again. She knew I had power. Quiet power, observant power, the kind that leaves scars without raising a voice. And as she walked away, I felt something unexpected, a surge of satisfaction, not from revenge itself, but from reclaiming control. From ensuring that those who thought they could manipulate me had miscalculated. I turned to my son and Emily. They were still blissfully unaware, still wrapped up in the joy of their perfect day. And I let them be. Because they didn't need to know the silent battles that had been fought to preserve their happiness. Sometimes the greatest victories are invisible. Sometimes the strongest power is restraint. I reflected on what had happened. How easily people assume that silence equals weakness. How easily they underestimate a mother's intuition. I smiled quietly to myself. They had believed they could manipulate, control, and erase me. And they had failed. Not through confrontation, not through shouting, not through dramatic exposure, but through calm, calculated observation. The day ended. The flowers were packed away, the guests had left, and the house returned to its quiet state. But in my mind, every detail remained vivid. Every manipulation catalogued. Every lie recorded. Because sometimes, the quietest person in the room already knows everything. And when the time comes, they will see that knowing is power.